Hello, this is the video introduction to week 10. Well, we're going to, well, first, thanks for getting your character sketches in. And one of the things I want you to try and do as we move through the course is continue to look for good sentences. That's part of reading like a writer. But now that you know about character sketches, start looking for character sketches as well. So this week and next week, we're going to sort of sample a couple of subject areas that you can write about with creative nonfiction. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about writing about music, and next week, we'll talk a little bit about writing about food. These are two pretty big areas of writing that you can move into. Now, here's a couple of things to think about. You'll have one more major assignment, an essay where I want you to be doing some sort of multimodal authoring. Uh, so, with that assignment, one of the things you can think about is that if you're looking for a topic to write about, think about trying to move into some specialized area. So, someplace where you have some knowledge, and this might be sports, it might be music, it might be food, it might be um, some activity like rock climbing or something like that. So, one of the things that you'll see with writing about music and writing about food is that sometimes it gets very technical in terms of how the author is talking about that particular subject matter. Certainly with writing about music, you're going to have authors get into music theory a little bit and talk about chord progressions or things like that. Uh, so this week, writing about music, and next week, writing about food. And then we're going to start going into Cheryl Strayed's Wild. Now, that's the longest work that we're going to be reading during the course. So if you want to go ahead and get started on that, that's fine. That'll get you ahead a little bit. So that's a full length memoir, and we'll be able to see a little bit about how uh, that genre, a solid extended example of that. It's also a book that is hit the bestseller list, has a popular film made about it. So Cheryl Strayed has done a very good job about marketing herself, and we'll talk about that a little bit also when we get there. So for this week, in terms of writing about music, there are two pieces that you'll find in the folder. One is by Robert Palmer, and there's two essays there. One of the essays is about Bo Diddley. If you've never heard Bo Diddley before, I would encourage you to go on YouTube or someplace and listen to Bo Diddley before you read it because it'll make a lot more sense. And then the second essay that Robert Palmer includes is included by Robert Palmer is about Sun Records, which is in Memphis. You can tour Sun Records if you want, but this is the place where Elvis Presley and Howling Wolf and a number of the early rock and roll blues people were recorded. Some people say it's basically where rock and roll was born. So those are in the folder. And by the way, Robert Palmer is a graduate of our institution back when it was called Little Rock University. So he is considered to be probably the best music critic working the latter half of the 20th century. He was a contributing editor to Rolling Stone and wrote reviews, New York Times, wrote liner notes for all kinds of important albums. Bob Bory in the music department knows his sister, and he says Robert Palmer is actually the guy who encouraged the and guided the Rolling Stones as they started to drill into Delta music. They knew a little bit about blues before they met Robert Palmer, but he was the one who actually encouraged them to go deeper into listening to Delta blues. So he's a key figure in a lot of ways. The second piece is by George Grella Jr., and it's about Miles Davis's album, Bitches Brew. It's just one chapter out of a book, a short book on Bitches Brew. The book is from this series, which is called 33 and a Third. And it's a real interesting series that will have books on important albums. So if there's some album you want to read about, you might look into that. Here again, I would encourage you to go to YouTube or someplace and listen to a little bit of Miles Davis's Bitches Brew before you read that excerpt. As you're reading, Bitches Brew is fusion, so it's fusing jazz and rock. Even a lot of jazz critics have trouble with this work. It was stunningly original, as many of Miles Davis's works were. For example, Stanley Conch, who is one of the most well-known jazz critics in the world, will say to this day that he doesn't understand Bitches Brew. He just doesn't get it. So it's a very different kind of music. I think it's a remarkable piece of music. As you're listening to it, you're going to probably think, how in the hell could anybody write about this and make sense of it? So I think you'll benefit from listening to Little Bitches Brew before you actually go and read the piece. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.